In this demonstration, you'll learn how to set up the programming language repository and how to implement the programming language detail view model. When we are done with this, you will also learn how to set up the view with a data grid so that the user can edit the existing programming languages in the Friend Organizer application. Let's start with the repository. In the Data Repositories folder of the Friend Organizer UI project, I have already created a new programming language repository class and also an interface. Before we look at these two files, I want to show you the content of the iGeneric repository interface. I have added a new method to this interface that is called getAllAsync. As you can see, it returns a task of IEnumerable of t. I have implemented this method in the generic repository class. When I scroll down, you can see this new method here, getAllAsync. It just uses the DB set from the DB context and it calls to list async to return all the items for this entity. Now this method is available on all the repositories in our Friend Organizer application. So now let's look at the iProgramming language repository interface. It just extends iGeneric repository of programming language. The programming language repository class is not much different. It inherits from generic repository of programming language and Friend Organizer DB context, and it implements the iProgramming language repository interface. It just has a constructor that calls the base constructor with the Friend Organizer DB context instance. So this is all I did. To use the repository, I also extended the Bootstrapper class. So when I scroll down here, you can see that I register the new type programming language repository as an iProgramming language repository. Now we can continue to use this repository in the view model. Here I've opened the programming language detail view model. I have already extended this class a bit. As you can see, I have added a new constructor parameter of type iProgramming language repository. I store this repository in the field _programming language repository. I have also added a programming languages property that I initialize here with a new observable collection of programming language wrapper. This means I have also added a new wrapper in our wrapper folder for the programming language entity. So here you see this wrapper and it just has the ID property and the name property like we have it also on the programming language entity. Here you see ID and name, and the name has also some data annotations. It's required and it can have a maximum length of 50. Now let's go back to the detail view model. When I scroll down, you can see here the loadAsync method. After I have set the ID property to the parameter that we have received, I loop over all the wrappers in the programming languages property. For each wrapper, I remove the event handler for the property changed event. Then I clear the programming languages collection and I load all the programming languages by using the getAllAsync method of the programming languages repository. I loop over the loaded languages and for each model I create a new programming language wrapper. On that wrapper, I define the wrapper property changed method as an event handler for the property changed event. Finally, I add the wrapper to the programming languages property. Now when I scroll down, you can see here the wrapper property changed event handler. If the hasChanges property of our detail view model is not true yet, I refresh it by using the hasChanges method of the programming language repository. I also check if the changed property name is hasErrors, then I raise the canExecuteChanged event for the save command. So if a programming language has errors, I don't want to allow the user to save all the programming languages. I scroll down a bit further and here you can see the programming languages property that we initialize in the constructor. Then you can see here the onDeleteExecute method and I haven't touched this one. We can't delete the whole screen with the programming languages, so we never implement this method. But we need to override it as it is abstract in the base class. In the UI we will also not add a delete button, but we will have a save button. And here you can see the logic for saving. In the onSaveCanExecute method, I check if the hasChanges property is true and if all the programming languages don't have any error. In the onSaveExecute method, I call the saveAsync method of the programming language repository and then I refresh the hasChanges property by using the hasChanges method of the repository. So that's it from the view model. Now we can continue with the view. At the beginning of this module, we have created the programming language detail view in the view folder of the Friend Organizer application. Now I have already added some content to this view. As you can see, the grid contains two row definitions. one row definition with a height of star, and one row definition with a height of auto. In the first row, I have added a data grid. The item source property is bound to the programming languages property of the programming language detail view model. As you can see, the data grid has just a single data grid text column with the header programming language. I have set the properties element style and editing element style to display validation errors for this data grid text column. You can see the binding here. I bind to the name property of the underlying programming language wrapper, and I use a two-way data binding, and I've specified that every change directly is written back to the model by using the update source trigger property changed. In the second row of the grid, I have placed a stack panel that contains a button with the content save and that binds to the save command of the programming language detail view model. So that's our simple user interface. Let's run the application and let's see this in action. I go to the Edit menu and I open up the Programming Languages tab. Here I see now the programming languages used in the Friend Organizer application. Now I can just edit in this data grid. When I remove the name here, you can see that this cell turns red. When I hover it, I can see the name field is required. So let's type in that name again and let's name it TypeScript 2.4. I click the Save button. Now I open up a friend and here we have the favorite language. And you can see it contains now TypeScript 2.4. I save that friend and I go back to the Programming Languages tab. Now I change it back to just TypeScript and I click Save again. When I go back to the friend, you can see that the language is not refreshed. So let's see how we can solve this by using events with the event aggregator. In this demonstration, you learn how to refresh the programming languages in Open Friend tabs by using Prism's event aggregator. Let's switch to Visual Studio. In the event folder of the Friend Organizer UI project, I have already created the new After Collection Saved event. As you can see, this class uses the After Collection Saved event args, and these event args just define a view model name property. The event args don't have an ID property because the After Collection Saved event is used to save a whole collection. We don't care about an ID, we just care about the view model name. Now let's open up the Detail View Model base class. In this Detail View Model base class, I have added a new Raise Collection Saved event method that can be used to raise the new After Collection Saved event. As you can see, it just uses the name of the current viewModel instance for the viewModel name property of the After Collection Saved event args. In the Programming Language Detail View Model, I used that new method already in the onSaveExecute method. So after we have saved the programming languages by using the repository, I raise our new event by using the Raise Collection Saved event method from the Detail View Model base class. This means the event is published and we need to subscribe to it in the Friend Detail View Model to refresh the languages here. In the constructor of the Friend Detail View Model, I have added this line to get the After Collection Saved event and to subscribe to it with the After Collection Saved method. So let's right-click on this method and let's go to the definition. As you can see, I check here if the view model name is the Programming Language Detail View Model. If that's the case, I call the Load Programming Languages Lookup Async method of the Friend Detail View Model class. As you might remember, this method clears the Programming Languages observable collection of the Friend Detail View Model. Then it adds the null lookup item for an empty entry, and it grabs the programming languages from the database by using the Programming Language Lookup Data Service. It loops over the received items and adds each item to the Programming Languages property. This means that the combo box in the user interface, which is bound to the Programming Languages property, will be refreshed. Let's see this in action and let's run the application. I open up Thomas Huber and you can see the favorite language is TypeScript. Now let's go to Edit Programming Languages and let's change TypeScript to 2.4. I click Save and now I go back to the friend and you can see that the language has changed to TypeScript 2.4. Let's change it back to just TypeScript. I click Save and I go to the friend and now it's TypeScript again. So the synchronization works. Now let's continue by implementing the logic to add and remove programming languages. In this demonstration you learn how to implement the logic so that the user can add and remove programming languages in the Friend Organizer application. Let's switch to Visual Studio. In the Friend Organizer UI project, I have already adjusted the programming language detail view. So here you can see that I have added 2 column definitions to this grid. In the second column definition, I placed a stack panel with 2 buttons to add and remove programming languages. As you can see, the command properties of these buttons are bound to the add command and to the remove command. When I scroll up, you can also see that I have set the selected item property of this data grid. I use a data binding to bind to the selected programming language property of the programming language detail view model. This is a two-way data binding, so that a selection in the data grid by the user will set the selected programming language property of the view model. Now let's look at the code that I have added in the programming language detail view model. Here you can see a new field of type programming language wrapper that is called _selected programming language. This is the backing field for a new property. In the constructor you can see that I initialized the 2 command properties add command and remove command with new delegate commands. When I scroll down, you can see the remove command and the add command property here. Also, the selected programming language property is defined here. In the setter of this property, I raise a can execute change event for the remove command. Only if a programming language is selected, the remove command can be executed. Now let's scroll down to the execute methods of the commands. Here you see the onRemove can execute method. If the selected programming language property is not null, then the programming language can be removed. But for sure we only need 1 semicolon here, so I remove the second one. Then when I scroll up, you can see the onRemove execute method. First I detached the event handler for the property changed event from the selected programming language. Then I remove the programming language model from the DB context by using the remove method of the programming language repository. I also remove the selected programming language from the programming languages observable collection of this detail view model. Then I set the selected programming language property to null, and I refresh the hasChanges property of this detail view model by using the hasChanges method of the programming language repository. Finally, I raised the can execute changed event of the save command. So this is how the remove logic works. When I scroll up, you can see the onAddExecute method. In this method, I create a new programming language wrapper for a brand new programming language. I add the wrapper property changed method as an event handler for the property changed event, and then I add the model to the DB context by using the add method of the programming language repository. Then I add the wrapper to the programming languages observable collection, that is the item source for the data grid in the view. Finally, I trigger the validation by setting the name property of the wrapper. As this name property is required, the user will see an error that tells him that he needs to enter a name for a new programming language. Now let's see this in action and let's start the application. First I open up a friend so that we can see the favorite language here. Then I go to edit programming languages, and here we see the 2 new buttons add and remove. First let's try to add a new programming language. So I click add, and here we have a new entry. When I hover it, I see the name field is required. I click into the cell and I type in Python. Now I click save to save my programming languages. When I go back to the friend and I expand this combo box, we can see Python there. Now let's go back to the programming languages and let's click the remove button that is active as soon as a programming language is selected. Now I have removed Python and I can save this. When I go back to Tomasuba, we can see that Python is no more here. So this works as expected. Now let me show you what happens when you remove a programming language that is referenced by a friend.